So the story of Daniel in the Bible is one of the most familiar stories ever told.
Lions, surrounded by ravenous beasts, with teeth or spears.
Daniel was thrown into the lion's den because he loved God and wouldn't stop praying to him, which went against the king's law. So to the surprise of everyone, Daniel was not harmed by the lions. In fact, they kept him company. Christians all over the world refer to this story to preach God's love, protection, and guidance to those who worship and believe in Him. But it came as a shock when a certain prophet from Ibadan announced that he was going to replicate the story of Daniel in the Bible. So in the Easter of 1991, the weather was beautiful. People had returned from the church and decided to visit University of Ibadan Zoo, which had so many wild animals from Africa and beyond. Now the University of Ibadan Zoo, like most modern zoos, displays wild animals primarily for conservation of endangered species as well as for research purposes and education. So the garden in the zoo is home to wild array of animals comprising of mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. But on that fateful day, that afternoon, visitors stormed the zoo as usual to enjoy the serene environment of the enclosure and have fun seeing different animals they have only seen on screens. Of all the animals in the zoo, the lions attracted the highest number of visitors. As expected, everyone was having a good time at the zoo except a man called Prophet Daniel Abodurin, who came to the zoo with one agenda in his mind: to show people that he served a living God, and the only way to prove this was to walk straight into the lion's den, pray with them, and pet them like Daniel did in the Bible without getting mauled. I mean, he had it all figured out.
Tongues are sharp as swords. I call upon your name, O Lord, from the depths of the pit.
So, the biblical story has it that God sent down some angels to shut the mouths of the lions, and Prophet Abodurin hoped that the same would happen at the University of Ibadan Zoo when he finally walks into the den. By this time, he was already attracting curious eyes to himself. You can imagine chilling at this lovely garden, having a good time with your family, and then when you turn around, you're seeing this haggard-looking man with a cane looking around the zoo, dressed in a red robe, and just looking all serious. You might probably think he's a madman who strayed in there, but of course he has something else in mind. After all, it was a public place and everyone was allowed, so people carried on with their day while stealing glasses at him. The prophet walked up to some of the staff at the zoo, introduced himself, and pleaded to be let into the lion's cage. But the staff looked him up and down and wondered if everything was all right in his head. They wondered if he knew what he was talking about. I mean, who would make such a ridiculous demand in broad daylight? Where did he think he was? The staff sharply turned him down and asked him to leave the zoo immediately before they called the police. But the prophet wasn't having it. He was very serious. He was very, very sure that this is what he wanted to do. So he took time to explain his intentions on how long he's been planning and praying fervently for this. He reminded them that God cannot forsake his people, and he was commanded by God to go into the den. After a lengthy plea and argument back and forth, disturbances and persuasion, by now people were already gathering, watching what the argument is all about. You're looking at this haggard-looking prophet in a red gown and a cane, arguing with the zoo staff. After a lengthy plea, disturbances and persuasion, the prophet's wish was granted. By this time, a crowd had gathered to watch what the drama was about. Now, we do not know if the zoo staff opened the cage and let him walk right in, or if Prophet Daniel on his own walked right into the cage. But he did make a case that, he was responsible for whatever that is going to happen to him, that he just wanted to fulfill God's promise and, listen to God and do whatever he wants him to do right in that cage. So, a crowd had gathered. They're all watching, trying to see what's going to happen. They thought he was a performer initially. I mean, it's a zoo, anything can happen. But seeing the way he was pleading to be let into the den got people so curious. Now, the prophet was allowed into the den at the bewilderment of everyone. So a lot of people at the scene couldn't believe what their eyes were seeing. Who is this man walking into the lion's cage? So Prophet Daniel walked right into the lion's cage. There were about 3 lions in there. So while inside the cage, he began reciting Bible verses and speaking in tongues, calling on to God of Daniel to perform wonders. Eyewitnesses narrated that he was screaming Jah, 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 which was believed to be a shortened form of Jehovah. So at first, the lions retreated, they went back. They're trying to understand why this man is in here, because I mean it was just a little bit after lunch. People who feed them don't walk right into their cage, so it didn't make sense why this prophet in his red gown is right in there, praying and chanting and waving his Bible in front of them. So the prophet thought his faith was really working and that God has clamped shut the lion's mouth against him. So he moved a little bit closer to the lions and kept chanting Bible verses. Then in a flash, one of the lions pounced on him while people watched. It was a very horrific sight. Then Prophet Daniel battled for his dear life, but his strength was no match for those hefty lions. And in a moment, he was torn in pieces and devoured. There was chaos in the zoo because people ran away. They had not seen anything like this before. It was horrible. So later on, after the lion have dealt with Prophet Abodurin, his remains were collected and later buried. That was how Prophet Abodurin met his bitter and horrible end at the University of Ibadan Zoo. Now, many people condemned the prophet for such a bizarre act, while others believed that the lions were possessed by demons stronger than the prophet and demanded that they should be killed. That's it for today's story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I tell strange, dark and mysterious stories. Thank you for watching and have a good day.